Couple more minutes. Sure.
To bring anything with me.
Dirty fingernail.
I just want to make sure if somebody asks me, I'm on the right page.
Try to get back. Here we go. Half past? Yep. Great. Okay, I'll call this meeting to order. This is the Village of Northfield Committee of the Whole. It's Tuesday, July 16th. It's 5:30. Deputy Clerk, you please call the roll.
Trustee Orth?
Here.
Trustee Whitaker?
Here.
Trustee Fowler?
Here.
Trustee Mendrick? Here. Trustee Gallen?
Here.
Trustee Denges?
Here. Public comment. At the start of all of our public meetings, we open the floor to those who wish to address the village board. Anybody? Thank you. Next on the agenda, approval of minutes, June 18th, 2024. Can I have a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Any comments? Any adjustments? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, review and acceptance of the sidewalk committee report. I don't know if Steve's going to be handling it, or I guess maybe it's a team effort. By the way, I got to say, it's a beautifully done report. So thank you for all the hard work, and thanks to the board members who were involved too. Great job. So I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lila Franklin, and I'm the planning technician here for the Village of Northfield. I'm here tonight just to give a brief overview of the Sidewalk Committee's work and the resulting sidewalk improvement plan that's been developed from the work that they've completed. So the beginning of this initiative started last spring in 2023 when this board recognized the need to install new sidewalks throughout the village to improve safety for pedestrians, to improve walkability of the village, and also to enhance accessibility for people to get to various destinations like schools and parks and the downtown area. The purpose of the sidewalk improvement plan then is really to act as a guiding framework for future sidewalk installation in the village. I want to reiterate before we get into it that it's not supposed to be a prescriptive document or like a construction document or anything like that. It's really meant to be just a plan of recommendations to guide the future of sidewalk installation in the village based on the sidewalk committee's work. Having this plan is also going to assist staff when we work on applying for grants to do some of this work, and it's also going to help the board as you engage in your yearly capital improvement planning efforts as well. I also really want to highlight the work of the Sidewalk Committee because they did so much to provide the content for this plan. They engaged in field work by going out and walking all of the public roadways in Northfield to understand the current sidewalk conditions and also to evaluate areas that may be most in need of a sidewalk based on factors like where areas might be unsafe for walking or areas that might not be really walkable currently. They also engaged with Northfield community members and heard their concerns and hopes for sidewalks in the village through a public open house that was held last fall, and also an online public survey that we had open in the fall as well. And they met as a committee around once a month since last spring in order to discuss the findings from this field work and the public engagement work in order to generate a list of priority locations for future sidewalk projects. So then the culmination of all of their work really came together in this final plan. It's a 25-page document that provides context to this work, and it includes a lot of various information, including an existing sidewalk inventory of Northfield. It includes maps. It includes a thorough summary of all of the public engagement that was done, and also a list of all of the priority projects that were recommended by the Sidewalk Committee. I think I can speak for us as staff and also the Sidewalk Committee members when I say that we're really excited about this plan and that we believe it's going to be a really useful resource for us when we apply for grants and just wanting to make the village a more walkable place. So yeah, with that, I know that was a really brief presentation. It's just a super high-level overview. I know you all have the plan, and we wanted to give most of the time for questions and comments from the board on this. So I want to thank you for listening and considering this document this evening, and I'm going to hand it over to Steve for some more comments.
Thank you, Lila. I just wanted to elaborate just a little bit more on the point on the capital improvement planning and that aspect of this. The goal here, again, was to provide the board with a well-thought-out plan and lists and a well-thought-out list of projects that the board can consider as it budgets for capital projects in the future. As funding is available, staff would then plan going forward to put forth certain projects during the CIP budgeting process for village board consideration. Like we did last year in this current fiscal year's budget, we would be presenting a project or two, but again, based on funding availability. That's kind of the first step as we consider whether to put forth a project or projects to the board during that CIP discussion. What projects are presented to the board on a year-to-year basis will be based on project feasibility. That would include adjacent property owner support. We did not go into that deep a dive with this planning effort with the Sidewalk Committee, or we'd be here, we wouldn't be here until next year or the year after. So that's a key consideration, obviously, foremost at the forefront of the committee's mind as they talked about these projects. Assured them that there would be a protocol as we considered projects in the future. We would reach out to those adjacent property owners, affected property owners, to make sure they were on board. Engineering issues, again, this is part of additional feasibility, a little more in-depth feasibility. We would do a little bit more engineering analysis to make sure that we understood any engineering challenges that it might need to be dealt with. And importantly, because a number of these projects are on other jurisdictions' right-of-ways, we need to engage with IDOT and/or Cook County for some of these projects and to get their approval, at least tacit approval at the forefront, at the front end, as we decide what to suggest to the board in a given year. And then in terms of availability of funding, that would depend upon project cost, what grants would be available in coming years, in the coming year, and whether competing capital projects. In other words, is there enough, even for a local share? Let's say we got a grant, we were to seek a grant like we did this year, or doing this year, and are budgeting for the local share. Is there enough in that capital improvement pot in a given year to think about the sidewalk project or even the local share of the sidewalk project? And then whether there's complementary capital projects that might be going on, and that may shift the priority even of a project. Are we going to, maybe there's a section of water mains that are going to be replaced. Maybe one of the sidewalk projects in this plan happens to be in the same parkway, or over that area. It's all going to be dug up. Does it make sense to maybe bring something that might be a medium priority or higher priority, and try to think about working that into a plan, into that plan. So lots of things to consider as we go forward in terms of that. If funding isn't if funding for the entire project is not available also, like we did this with this Bosworth, these Bosworth curb ramps, we can decide or think about whether a particular project can be phased. Can be phased over a number of different years based on funding availability. Take it one step at a time. A part this year, a part next year. We're still waiting to hear whether we get this Invest in Cook grant for these Bosworth Road ramps. If we didn't, we talked to the board about when we budgeted for this project that if we don't get that grant, we can use that 50% share that we budgeted for to do 50% of the ramps. So that would be a consideration too as we think about presenting projects and their feasibility going forward. So just wanted to make sure everybody we were clear on that in terms of how we would proceed, how staff would proceed with these projects going forward in future years. And then finally, just acknowledgement. I got to tell you, this committee was a working committee. The committee spent a ton of time out in the field, literally being our eyes and ears out there in various neighborhoods. Trustee Gallen, who is the chair of the committee, Trustee Whitaker, at the front end, as they recruited for this committee, were very cognizant of actually wanting to get a diverse cross-section of people who lived in different parts of town, perhaps different generational things, representation, people who are active, in the community, people who bike, people who walk, and people whose kids, got to get from point A to point B to schools and to parks and whatnot. So committee, I've worked over the years with lots of committees, lots and lots of committees. I'd say this has got to be one of the hardest working committees that I've worked with. And a shout out to the chair, Trustee Gallen. As a chair, he also put in extra work, lots of extra time. He was our sounding board, staff sounding board, as we went, did the plan, drafted the plan for the committee to consider. Just about everything. Matt was there to give us his input and spent a lot of time doing that for us, and we appreciate that. So a lot of work went into this, and then again, Lila, really 90% of the staff's work in this, Lila has taken on and done a really good job at. So we appreciate all of that. And with that, I'd just ask Trustee Gallen, who is again the chair of the Sidewalk Committee, if we missed anything that you'd like to add.
You didn't. You did a really, really good job. I don't have anything to add. I would just say, to reiterate what Steve said, it was a lot of work put in, a real grassroots effort, and I just was amazed by sort of how diligent everybody was in doing this. So it was just a really great experience, and I think the committee members felt the same way about it. I know there's at least two here the ands. So thanks for coming. But yeah, no, Steve, I think you covered the waterfront.
Yeah, I want to reiterate too, the effort is shown in the quality of this product. Thank you to the staff, Trustee Gallen, Trustee Whitaker, and the 11 other residents who helped out on this. I think it's an excellent guiding document, so thank you very much. Any other questions from the trustees?
I have a question, and again, agree with all the positive comments. I guess one thing I want to say, so much effort went into it. Reminds me a little bit of when you buy a house and you get that really good inspection report, and it tells you about all the things you could do to make your house better, and you wish you could do them all. There is the one, priority one stretch of Wagner. And, I think we got kind of creative with Bosworth to find a way to maybe take some action there. And is it possible to put page 15 up there? And, unfortunately, I live right over the fence here on Chapel Hill Lane. So I see the action in the parking lot of the nursery school and the preschool. And it's pretty much year-round. And I know everyone knows this, but I just kind of want to reiterate what happens. So it's right on the corner of Wagner and Willow. The school's across the way. There's a long driveway that parents need to take to get around to the back of the church where the nursery school is. So every day, there it is. Can you make it that one as big as possible? Yeah.
And I see you waving from your deck.
I hope this makes sense.
That's the dog's tail.
Here's the school, Willow and Wagner. Here's the nursery school, here's the church. So the kids, everyone's got to get around to there. So you've got to come down this long driveway, and there's no sidewalk on either side. So what happens is, there's a sidewalk here, so it's usually young parents or nannies with a stroller, and they're crossing right here. So they're not crossing, they're crossing like right in the middle to get into this long driveway here. And there's cars here going in, picking up their kids, coming out, and strollers. This little stretch here is critical, because if there was a sidewalk here, just this little piece, people could cross the street at the light, take that sidewalk, and Dwayne Meyer, the pastor, has expressed interest in doing a sidewalk there. So I guess what I'm asking the board, because I know this is complicated, would we be willing to consider on our own, just because it's so important and safety conscious, this little piece right here? And I know, it's somewhat complicated, nothing's easy, but it's not the whole stretch. This little piece, and Dwayne putting in a sidewalk here, and again, he's told me 5 times he wants to do it. And I think he's expressed that, but if we could provide that little piece and that sidewalk, then the only thing that you have to do is cross this little piece of driveway. So I know it sounds like a little micro piece, but this is our #1 priority. And I'm just wondering whether this board would consider on our own doing that. Like, and again, not knowing the cost, maybe it's $50,000, maybe it's $100,000, maybe it's more, but I get really terrified seeing these parents with these kids, and it's every day, not just once, not just twice, but I see the same thing 30 times every day. And so I guess I'm asking the board, is this something we'd be willing to work? And at this point, Matt, I don't know if it'd be the committee, but what is our appetite for doing something kind of different at this little spot?
I mean, from the committee standpoint, I don't think you need to twist any arms. That was the #1 project from start to finish, at every turn. So, I'm very comfortable saying that, they're very enthusiastic about that project. That's the committee's perspective. Now it's in our hands, and, those are different questions.
Well, I think as we look into the next budget year, we consider this, find out what the engineering is, try to get some estimates of costs. I agree, it's a priority. There's a couple different components here. Barnaby, thanks for bringing this up too. And I know you live nearby and you witness this firsthand, the interaction between pedestrians and cars in that area. There's another component I wanted to bring up is that I'm concerned about the stacking that occurs in front of Middle Fork School. And I'd caution against, so it's our road, so we can, it's our right of way, so we can go ahead with, and pursue it. But if they're gonna reconfigure that area in front of the school to try to accommodate more drop-off lanes or whatever, you wouldn't wanna, I think we gotta talk to the school district too, because I didn't wanna make an investment and then have it be taken out, right? Or be part of I understand your concern though, and I think it should be a priority of it's a priority of the committee, but I think also of the board. So let's address that, I think, in the next budget year.
Is it possible at this point to ask staff to take this particular project a step further and do some of that due diligence so we know? I mean, I think we've all heard that the school is getting started on some sort of a traffic study, so that we just can have a little bit more information, because it is a critical spot, and if we only do that one section and they reconfigure however they do the school, I feel like we could still maybe do that without it being impacted by, unless you're talking about an additional turn lane somewhere. I don't know, but I would love to have more information if that's something that we could continue to work through. Patrick, I would ask for your thoughts on doing something like that now rather than waiting till the budget cycle, so we at least can get the conversation started.
I think there's a chance we could take a look at just a preliminary engineering review of what it would take and give you some rough ideas by the next meeting of, here's a rough estimate by lineal foot of what we think this is cost and what would the board like to do. We do have to be careful when we look at these projects to make sure that the sidewalk has a beginning and ending point. But I think especially if we're working with a church, there may be a way to make that a complementary project that doesn't get us into any ADA concerns as we move forward.
I'm sure, Barnaby, and I think the committee knows too, that there's probably going to be a fair amount of engineering because there's a drainage swale right there. I was out there looking at it, and but I'd love to know. And I think getting to village manager, Brendan's point, I think we could start with Steve, do a little preliminary work here, try to figure out how involved it is, right? Great, thanks, Barnaby. Anybody else?
Steve, have you contacted the county or the state and worked with them at all, trying to figure out what kind of lead time they would need if we were interested in doing any of the sidewalks that are under the jurisdiction of the county or the state, so that if there's permits or what their appetite is, or approach something for them to see if they're interested in doing any kind of shared costs on some of these areas?
Not yet. This is a draft plan until the board approves it or puts their, gives us the thumbs up. We didn't want to, we didn't want to do that in the event that you guys change the priorities or change the projects or anything like that. But we would certainly do that really project by project, because it's going to depend upon a lot of details and a lot of the locations and lots of different components. And so we probably do that into due diligence as to if we're pushing a project forward and it was a county or IDOT, in their county or IDOT right of way, we would engage them on a project by project basis. For instance, Wagner, that sidewalk would actually go into this little short piece of sidewalk would actually go into the IDOT right of way. So we have to engage with them on that. That would be one of the next steps we would take on that project, that particular project, as an example.
Well, I'm just thinking too, with the county or with the state, if there's any thought, if they're working on or looking at potentially using funds that they may have or grants to start sidewalk replacement or sidewalks in areas that don't have sidewalks currently, and then find out, with how we budget and with their life cycle and time cycle of what they do to kind of try to figure that out and see if we can.
Sure, be part of the conversation we could answer.
Because I know it takes time with some of these agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Again, great work, everybody. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Matt.
Would this be is there any, I know the public was here, but should we ask again if anybody has any comments, or if the two participants in all the committee work wanted to say anything or had any thoughts? I just,
Great idea, Tracy. Anybody have any comments?
Not at this time.
okay.
Thank you for asking.
Next on the agenda, discussion of a method of evaluating the performance of the village manager.
Steve. So is the board good? Would I get a thumbs
Oh,
up?
sorry. Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion.
Because we do need like some tacit approval so that the
Yep.
next grant, we could say, the board approved this plan, so.
Yeah.
Greg, I'll make a motion if we need to.
No, you don't need to make a motion. Everybody's in favor of this,
Okay.
though. Great, thank you. Again, next on the agenda, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Lila. Discussion of the method of evaluating the performance of the village manager.
Well, I considered the approach of just saying excellent and providing a pre-form for everybody, but I decided that's probably not the best way to go about things. You know, with me being new here, now is the perfect time for the board to decide how you want to go through the process of evaluating the performance of the village manager. It's a situation that often we don't think about until you reach a point in time when you're like, oh, wait, this isn't going really well, or this could be going better. So while we're early in the process and we still all love each other greatly, it's a great time to come out now and say, hey, let's set up this document, this process, so we all have it agreed to and we move forward. And frankly, for me, it is probably one of the more important days for me every year, as I get to hear from each of you of your likes, your dislikes, how things are going. I can tell you through my career, often the numbers, the score doesn't matter really as much as the feedback back and forth. Because if there's something irritating, like a tick that I have, and you're just like, Patrick, stop it. It's good to know. But it's also really more about our goals and objectives for the year of, are we moving forward? Are we getting staff moving in the right direction? It's a check-in process for us. And it's something that I really want to make sure we did. So Melissa, if you bring up that PowerPoint, it would be great. So you've all had a memo for me that described kind of the reason for the evaluation and gave you some more complete, if you will, examples of what those evaluations could be. But really, for me, there's a couple of key things that I like to make sure we get in any document, any decision you make. So Melissa's bringing up the PowerPoint presentation that will help for the members of the audience who didn't see the memo. This will help you know kind of what we're talking about as we go through it.
It's forcing me to restart, I'm sorry. I had it loaded, it looked really nice.
But you know they're going to evaluate me on that.
This is on you guys.
So there are a couple of key things that I would like to make sure, and generally for a village manager or any employee evaluations, there's some key things you want to make sure are included in any evaluation. And almost anything you do, you want to make sure is measurable. So it's great to say, make things prettier in the village, but how do we measure what that is? So clearly defined goals that are able to be measured are an important process for us. Also, the evaluation, in my opinion, should be linked to the village goals. Because if you're evaluating me on how I'm doing in public speaking, but not looking at, are we getting the things done that you set for the year, it really sets us all up to fail, because suddenly I'm more worried about taking extra classes in public speaking skills and less about making sure we get the new sidewalk installed on Wagner Road. Also, the goals should be achievable and measurable. So it's a really important thing that we set goals that you know that while they may be a good stretch for us as staff, they are something that could happen. And also, we've got to have a way to measure it at the end of the evaluation cycle to say, sometimes it's not just a black or white, happened, didn't happen. How much progress do we make toward the goal? And the last thing is really looking in those goals to make sure that we set targets for next year. So it is not uncommon in a village manager evaluation to say, achieve the village goals that were put forth in the budget, but we also want you to work on these four things as we go through the process. So how do we get there? How do we actually get all that wrapped into one document so both the elected officials and the village manager understand what the expectations are for the year? And there are a couple different ways to do it. And I gave a couple of examples in this beautiful PowerPoint that I spent 7 days on. We'll really list 3 kind of levels, if you will, of evaluation document. The first is a detailed and what I call a numbers-driven evaluation, where there's a number of different categories and criteria to measure. And for each of them, there's a score, for example, 1 through 5. 5 is most excellent. 1 is needs lots of help. And the board members all go through, they look at that document, they read each criteria, their descriptions with it, they give numbers in, and whoever's processing that, whether it be the village president or a designee, adds all that up, averages it, and says, Patrick, in this area, you scored a 4.2. And I know 4.2 means X. That's what I call the data-driven or data input method. The middle one will be the thorough or the text-driven input. That text-driven input is more broad categories with texts that come out, and it gives you a lead kind of question or area, and then asks each trustee to put in, what did he do well in this area? What did we need improvement in for each category as you move forward? It takes a little bit more work from the trustee perspective, but it also gives us lots of good information because you get kind of a preset form for everybody's opinion. And the third option there is the input-driven, where that's often driven by the village manager, providing you a report at the end of the evaluation period saying, here are all the things we got done for the year, here are the village goals, and here's our status on each of those goals. And by the way, even though we got those done, here are all the other things we got done. The village board can then take that document and start to work forward and say, oh yes, we agree with that, or we didn't agree with that, and start a little bit more of the text focus in response to that. Package that all up in a summary document to present to the village manager. Now, for the members of the public, you may be wondering, well, how does all this happen? It's a secret. We can't tell you because it happens in what's called closed session, meaning the village board gets to leave the public meeting, go into closed session, and go through that evaluation process and talk about my performance. Generally speaking, in local government, when the board is discussing the performance of any employee, it's done in private for the, call it the respect of the employee. So their performance is not getting aired publicly. It's the board's job to make sure that I'm doing my job well and holding me accountable. And this is their process for doing it. So the board will go through whatever decision they make with that evaluation, discuss it as a group, and then call me in either that night or a subsequent meeting and deliver their report to me. Often the village president says, Patrick, here's how you did for the year. We like this, we didn't like that. We've talked to everybody. And then we go around the room. So each trustee has an opportunity to say, kind of put their comments in, much like you just heard with the sidewalk plan. Here's what we liked about it, here's what we didn't like. Because sometimes something that's really important to a particular trustee may not have made the evaluation document, but they want to make sure that I'm aware of it. So it provides that opportunity for a good dialogue back and forth. And probably the most important thing is for the village manager not to be defensive. It is good input coming in, and it's really hard when you're getting evaluation not to say, yes, but we had COVID and we couldn't do this. It's really not about that. It's about getting the feedback and working through the process. So I mentioned the kind of text-driven and data-driven, or some numbers-driven. Those two examples are here. So you see the top one is the numbers-driven approach, an example of looking at the manager's professional skills and status. The village board would look at each of those categories. For each one, put a number, average them, and for item number 2, you have an average of 4.5, and then it's averaged at the bottom. The text-driven is what you see in the lower white box for management administration. What areas is the manager strong with? What areas does the manager need more work, or weaknesses, as I like to call it, but in the HR world, you really call them areas for improvement or suggestions for improvement. So those are two examples as the board looks through that process. And really the next thing here is talking about next steps, and it's really the decision points for, as a board, you've had a little bit of time to think about this. What is your preferred approach, or is there something totally different here that you think we I've missed or you'd like to handle it in a different way. So I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So I'm going to hear from the trustees first. I have my own ideas. In the three, I'll just say one thing before I hear from each of the trustees. I'd like to hear from each of you. There's a hybrid too that we could develop, something that's both numbers and input driven. But if there's a preferred way, anybody want to start?
I will.
Thank you, Tracy.
I will, excuse me. So I'm glad you mentioned hybrid because that's what I was going to suggest. I very much like the input-driven where we get a reminder of all of the things that staff has accomplished in a year because, you know, information in, information out, 6 months goes by. So I like the reminder of all of the things that were accomplished in a year. Then I would prefer the text-driven application because I think that's a better opportunity to put real input on paper. You know, numbers driven, are you a 2 or a 3 or a, 2.5 or whatever? That's more subjective to me. I would rather have an opportunity to say, hey, this, I like this, I think this needs work, or I struggle with your delivery on this particular thing. So that's my preference. Do you want to go to do you want us to comment on when we want to do it, or do you want just the preferred method to start with?
Let's just preferred method, sit with
Great.
that for right now.
Okay.
So just, Tracy, so we understand, you would not go the numbers driven.
Correct.
But are kind of proposing, if I'm understanding you correctly, kind of a hybrid between the text and input, right?
Yeah, I like that summary document of
Yeah.
a period of time that these are the things we've accomplished, or staff has accomplished, and then that to me informs the other questionnaire, the text-driven questionnaire.
Excellent. Anybody else? Next, you want to take it?
I'll go.
Thanks, Marty.
Well, first of all, Patrick, kudos to you for showing up and doing this. I think prenuptial agreements are really important. No. I think it's really important that we do this and that we take this on. I know some members of the board have been interested in this for a while. I guess, you were here, I think it was last meeting, and you gave us Patrick's top 5. So how would Patrick's top 5 be infused into what we would do here? Because to me, I'm in favor of kind of a results-driven approach. And so priorities that you or the board established that are important, I think need to be a part of this process. So you mentioned those 5 things. Some of them you've probably already made great progress on. Some of them, we barely were able to talk about and are going to take years. But I guess I would be interested in a way that those priorities are part of the review so that you can update. I agree. I don't think this board is adverse at all to doing the work of, the content piece of sharing thoughts on various categories. And I think we can decide what those are. So I also like the numerical because when you get 7 different people rating things, you just get some interesting results. We might all agree on things and we might not. So to me, since that's easy, so I think the content piece is really important, the text. I'm interested in the numbers. And then I feel like that other piece is the piece that you bring with you to our meeting. And we obviously get it, but that's sort of your side of the conversation. But I guess I'm most interested, and again, I hope I'm being clear, is, Patrick's top 5 priorities need to be a big part of what we're talking about at the end of the year. And if the board has 5 other priorities, maybe those come up in the process. But I want to find a way to have, your identified priorities infused into this process.
Sounds like, Barnaby, that it's, you're thinking of a hybrid of all 3.
Right. No, I am. I admit, and I apologize for that. But the only difference I'd say is the final piece is sort of what Patrick brings to the table.
Yeah.
So
I think it's an important thing as well.
Yeah.
Tom?
It's really easy to put down a number. I don't know how much thought really goes into it when you have the numbers in front of you. I think that this is a significant document that we're going to be completing every year. And not just for the current city manager, but it also lays out the groundwork for a future village manager, see what the expectations are and how the board evaluates people. And I think, you know, we have a pretty thoughtful board, and I like the numbers because you can take the data and have a pretty quick look at what the overall opinion is. But really to take a deep dive in and be able to write things down for you to see those as well is really important as well. So I'm a hybrid guy. I think I would stress the original hybrid of the input and the text, and maybe a caveat of a little numbers, but I think that, you know, I'm most appreciative of the fact that you've taken on this, Patrick, and, you know, that we're gonna actually have something to evaluate and get the input from the trustees on how the performance is going. And I do know that, you know, it's the village president's responsibility to, unless he designates somebody else, to compile the data and put it all together. And I think that, you know, it's really easy if someone's not doing a good job, and I think this is where I'm thinking of the numbers driven, is to give somebody a 1 and leave it at that. That's really easy to say you're doing a terrible job, but you need to know what you're doing and how you can improve it. And I guess that's my point about just the numbers issue. And I've worked on some evaluations before on another board that I'm on, and it's really easy to create a Google form, and every member on this trustee can input, whether it's the numbers, it's the input. It'll figure out all the calculations for you. It will compile all the data from each trustee under each question, and you'll have it all. So, you know, I guess a long answer, I'm for the hybrid version too.
Okay. Trustee Gallen?
Hybrid. I like the input part of it, I think for the reasons that everybody said. It's a nice summary of what the village manager thinks that they've done, and from their perspective, what they've done. So that part's key for me. I mean, between text and numbers, I don't disagree with what anybody has said. I would just say, I think from the numbers standpoint, I think with text, sometimes we focus on the things that are really on our mind when we write something, and there are other areas that we're forced to think about with the numbers that you might not think about otherwise. So I think sometimes the numbers captures more of the universe than maybe the text part does. So I would just be hesitant to not have that numbers part, just so, you know, we're thinking about everything that's kind of going on and not just the things that are on the top of our head. I don't know, that's where I stand on that.
Thank you. Trustee Orth?
I'm kind of a combination of everything that so far the 4 trustees have spoken have said. The numbers are important, text-driven is important, inputs-driven is important. I think when you look at the numbers, you want to be able to have numbers, but then also put down comments. So if he gave you a 2, why did you get a 2 on something? If you got a 5, why did you get a 5 on that? And put the comments, the things that you are doing well, the things that you need to seek improvement on. It's also important that we put something together with goals and objectives, whether it's a combination of board goals that we work with you, or goals that we'd like you to see you complete in that first 6 months or first year, and then things that you see that you say, I'd like to try to work on this, and then we work together, and at the end of the year, you know, evaluate all of that. And when we evaluate all that, it's also based on, like you said, you know, sometimes there are things, extenuating circumstances that have happened that may have to be, you know, figured into that mix, into that evaluation. So I'm in that hybrid mode with that. I also think that it should be not the fiscal year jumping ahead, but the calendar year, because I think of what we do in a calendar year may be important, whichever works better for you or is easier for you. I mean, obviously, fiscal year because is important because, you know, our budget's May to May, and it may coincide with a lot of the projects that are going on too. So whatever you feel comfortable with as far as fiscal or calendar, which works out better for you to put together, is fine with me. I see both sides of it working well. But yeah, I kind of like that combination to where you actually put a number down, and then you can also put comments in there so you understand it. So it's not just a number, but the hybrid comment as well.
Good, thank you. Trustee Fowler?
Not much to add. We've kind of said it all here. I think the best thing is this will give us an opportunity the first time to go through it, see if it's useful and for us. And I think that's the important part. So I think we need to stay flexible and see what the output is. And from there, we can adjust accordingly. That would be my only thing I'd add outside of what everyone said. So.
Well, traditionally, we have, now, I hope we got the information that you needed on the preferred method, which is, it's going to be a blend of all of them.
So not chocolate, not vanilla, Neapolitan.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Preferred period. Currently, we do a review in January for the village manager. But the review, the actual, that coincides with the review of salary too, right? That would come sometime after that. I think that the preferred period would be, and I'd love to hear from the trustees on this, should work with our budget year. That's my view, which would be our fiscal year. Anybody else have a preferred method comment?
I like the budget year, but I do think I want to get input because that's a busy time of year. How's that work in? And I'd love to get Patrick's input about that because I don't want to jam something through at the wrong time and all of a sudden he's stressed out and our eye's not on the right ball at the same time, right? So.
It certainly is a busy time of year where we're getting things all assembled and going out. The timing of this, and I think I may have put it in the initial memo, we try to back it up so that the evaluation is actually occurring a month or so before the budget is really being presented to the board in earnest. But that is the busiest time of the year for us, for sure.
Anybody else?
Would we want to try to do something like we talked about the 6 month, start at 6 month and do a 6 month evaluation to start out or get some goals and objectives so that we have something for him? Obviously that he's new in the position, but something that we can evaluate, set some goals, in a 6 month period, and then use that as a partial evaluation or an evaluation for coming up so that we do have some plan in place or goals and objectives for Patrick to view.
My gut feeling, and I'd love to hear from the board on this, is that a 12-month check-in is plenty. It's a once a year check-in. You get enough feedback from us individually during the year as well. So I think that's satisfactory. Any strong opinions on whether it should be the calendar year? Patrick, like Trustee Fowler, what do you think what's in your experience has worked best in both Highland Park and Kenilworth?
I think that tying it to the fiscal year makes a lot of sense because part of your evaluation structure is how did we do on the budget? Right. And if you evaluate me at a different cycle, you're always looking X months behind. Mm-hmm. So it gets a little bit out of whack on that. The downside of that right now is you won't evaluate me until I had been here for a full year. And I think that's partly where for the first time, do you want to go through a 6 months check-in with me to say, okay, we are or not on track so far, and also give this new Neapolitan document a test run to make sure it's working you want before we go all the way into a year and go, ooh, wait, this isn't exactly what we had in mind.
That's what I meant, Greg. I meant this first initial one, we go through 6 months, but after that, obviously every year. Okay. So that's more, to make sure exactly what Patrick said, is that he's on track, we're on track, and we don't have a year later and we say, well, I wish we would have looked at some of these issues or concerns earlier. Mm-hmm. So that's what I meant, not 6 months every year, just 6 months on this initial, since he's the new village manager.
Anybody else have a comment on that?
I don't think 6 months is necessary because I feel like his goals have been set during the interview process and in our initial meetings and the first presentation that he made to us. And I would love, as you promised, again, in the interview process, there was that 30, 60, 90-day plan. And so in 6 months, you come back and repeat that same presentation that you gave us with your key objectives Some of them you've already met with police and some of the billing changes we're making. I would just like to continue to see that kind of report. I don't need to do an evaluation in 6 months, frankly. I don't.
Anybody else?
I would agree with trustee Mendrick that I don't think it's, we're evaluating Patrick continually. From the day you started to where we are today to where we will be in 6 months. And I think that it wouldn't be fair to evaluate him on 6 months because really, like trustee Mendrick said, he knows what he has to do. He knows the tasks at hand. He's doing them. And I think as a board, we're very comfortable and happy with the things that are going on. Plus I also think that it gives us time to create the Neapolitan ice cream and make it the best for when we do his evaluation, at next year.
Anybody want to add to that?
Well, I guess that the question of what is next in this process, because, I went through this and there were some suggestions I would have to this, but, I could share those, in person. But I think this process of putting together this review will be a nice way of the board and Patrick working together to craft this so that when we actually come to doing the review, it's familiar to all of us and we just sort of move forward with it.
Why don't we, I'm sorry.
Let's try to, why don't we refine this in a memorandum that Patrick will share with us, and we will give Patrick input directly. I think that's a good way to proceed. Everybody okay with the fiscal year?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other questions that you have for the board here?
That's it for this.
Okay,
Thank you.
Great. Number 6 on the agenda, any other business? Trustees, can I have a motion and a second to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We will reassemble.